It is very good to be back here with you. We're in John chapter 9, one of my favourite stories, the healing of the man born blind. He's such an intriguing character. And what Jesus does for him is this lovely picture again of renewal and restoration, making things good and right again as he shines his light out. But interestingly, we'll see this light that gives one man his sight again actually also makes others blind. Let's take a closer look. So the miracle, or the sign as John calls it, that Jesus performs in this chapter comes on the heels of what he had said on that last day of the Feast of Tabernacles in the temple. In John 8 we're told, "I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness but will have the light of life." And this idea of light was introduced right from the prologue, wasn't it, where we're told that the true light is coming into the world. And then Jesus picks it up in chapter 12 as well and says, while you have the light, believe in the light so that you may become sons of the light. So light shines in. Jesus brings the true light into the world, but it divides people. On one hand, there is belief in some, those who become sons of light, or as the prologue said, sons of God. But it also meets unbelief and hostility and rejection. So it divides people. So that's the backdrop to this action that Jesus now does. He now demonstrated, if you like, in the life of one man, this miracle of giving sight. So Jesus, having at the end of chapter 8 escaped being stoned, is now cruising along, and as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind?" Now, Jesus had indeed been talking about judgment and sin in the last chapter, and the guys are thinking it through and have come to a sort of simplistic view of what judgment might look like. This idea that sin, a specific sin, might lead to bad things happening in this life. So is this ailment, this blindness, evidence of God's judgment? But their view needs to be expanded. So Jesus does that by saying, it was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it's day. Night is coming when no one can work. And while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So he's going to redirect them to see that judgment is actually something that happens now as the light shines, as we do the work of God. That will actually expose and reveal the state of men's hearts. He said something similar after the conversation with Nicodemus. He who believes in him is not judged. He who does not believe has been judged already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. This is the judgment, that light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, for their deeds were evil. So judgment is actually almost, you could say, self-inflicted. Light shines and people cower and resist it, and their evil hearts are exposed. But Jesus' work is to do the work of God and reveal the light. So he says, at the end of this chapter, he says, "For judgment I came into this world, so that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind." So in chapter 5, Jesus had said, "For the works which the Father has given me to accomplish, the very works that I do, testify about me, that the Father has sent me." So his works reveal who he is and God's purposes of renewal and redemption and giving life and freedom. But then he tells them, this is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent. So the fulfillment of doing God's work in the world is that people come to faith. But of course, that's the thing that divides. And now comes the wonderful moment. When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and applied the clay to his eyes and said to him, "Go and wash in the pool of Siloam," which translated means sent. So he went away and washed and came back seeing. Isaiah had told us that in the age of the Messiah, then the eyes of the blind will be opened. It's such a beautiful picture of new creation, of renewal. And it's actually someone who's been blind from birth, not just an accident. He's never, ever been able to see. It's just his whole life is blindness. And you can't help but think, with the idea of this clay, making the clay, it's such a reminder of, well, Genesis 2:7 says, "Then the Lord God formed man of the dust from the ground." He spits in the dust and makes clay. Here is new creation. And Isaiah calls us as human beings, we are the clay. You are the potter. He is our creator God. Maybe that's why Jesus used clay. But there's more to it than that. In actual fact, the Pharisees had created a lot of rules about what not to do on the Sabbath, and one of them is do not spit into the dirt lest you make clay and start to mold it. I wonder if Jesus has gone, oh, it's the Sabbath, watch this. Now, we're not told for a couple of verses that it's the Sabbath, but this sending the man on a trek to the pool of Siloam is yet another breaking of one of those Pharisaic rules. Here it is. It's also been significant at the Feast of Tabernacles. This is where the priests went to collect the water, then march it up to the Temple Mount, which you can see in the back there. And just out of curiosity, in 2004, it was discovered after being gone for millennia when a pipe burst in Jerusalem. So they've been digging and unearthing all sorts of things there, and it's another lovely example of confirmation of the Bible story. So he's healed and he heads home. Therefore, the neighbours and those who previously saw him as a beggar were saying, "Is not this the one who used to sit and beg?" And others were saying, "This is he." And still others were saying, "No, but he is like him." And he kept saying, "I am the one." Now, I can't help but see a difference between the way this man is going to react and what we saw in chapter 5 with the sick man who was able to walk again. He showed a real lack of gratitude. There was no evidence of faith. And he actually goes and dobs Jesus into the Pharisees, and Jesus is persecuted after that. In verse 14 of chapter 5, Jesus' words to him are, "Behold, you have become well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you." This guy, we're going to see, has a different reaction. But already the people who've seen it are starting to question their own eyes and what they're seeing. So they were saying to him, "How then were your eyes opened?" And he answered, "The man who is called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went away and washed, and I received sight." And they said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I do not know." The man who is called Jesus. I'm sure it's not the first time he's heard that name. The synagogue that he's been begging near, we actually learn in a few verses that the Pharisees there have banned anyone from calling Jesus the Christ. So there has been talk about what he's been doing and what he's been saying. And now he simply reports what Jesus has done for him. And he's happy to say what he doesn't know. I don't know where he is now. But it's interesting. You can see the three things that he said happened to him, the clay and the washing and the walking, have all been offences under the Pharisaic law. And to those very Pharisees, they now bring the man who was formerly blind. Now it was a Sabbath on the day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. And then the Pharisees also were asking him again how he received his sight. And he said to them, "He applied clay to my eyes, and I washed, and I see." Now the clay is repeatedly mentioned on the Sabbath because that is deeply offensive to these Pharisees. It is indeed a sin according to them. And the Pharisees ask repeatedly, how, what were the steps? There's no wow that you can see again. There's no wonder and rejoicing that God has done this amazing, wonderful thing in this man's life. No, how? Because what rules is he breaking is the issue for them. And therefore, some of the Pharisees were saying, "This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath." But others were saying, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And there was division among them. So the light is shining. God is doing his work, and it's revealing the state of these people's hearts. In actual fact, the minority report, if you like, the others, have actually asked the right question. If he's a sinner, it's impossible for him to do this. Surely this is a sign that God is with him. So they said to the blind man again, "What do you say about him, since he opened your eyes?" And he said, "He is a prophet." The Jews then did not believe it of him, that he had been blind and had received sight. So from the Pharisees' point of view, this really can't be happening. He's definitely not the Christ. He's definitely a lawbreaker. So this must all be just false, a lie, some kind of fabrication. But the ex-blind man is actually on the right track when he calls Jesus a prophet. He's gone from the man called Jesus to now he's someone who's speaking from God. It's the same track that the woman at the well went through, if you'll recall. The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet." Or the crowds after the feeding of the 5,000. This is indeed the prophet who was coming into the world. It's a step of faith in the right direction. But the Pharisees have got a problem because they didn't believe it until they called the parents of the very one who had received his sight and questioned them, saying, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? And how does he see?" His parents answered them and said, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but how he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know. Ask him, he's of age. He'll speak for himself." They are entirely intimidated by their interrogators. And we're told his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. For this reason, his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." And some of John's readers would know what it felt like to be kicked out of the synagogue for confessing Jesus to be the Christ. And to be kicked out of the synagogue apparently was catastrophic, really, in terms of functioning in that society. So it came at a very high cost, which his parents are not willing to pay. So this actual healing is proving a very awkward thing for those who say Jesus cannot be the Christ. Where do they go with that? Somehow they have got to rein this in. So a second time they called the man who'd been blind and said to him, "Give glory to God. We know this man is a sinner." And he answered, "Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." The truth is a real problem for the Pharisees. They cannot make this thing go away or make sense of it. But it's not a problem for him. And he can say, I don't understand that. You're saying he's sin. I don't get that. But this I know. I was blind and now I see. So the Pharisees go back to those how and what questions again. What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered them, "I told you already. You did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you not want to become his disciples too? Do you?" This man is unintimidated, and I think as he hears the Pharisees' inability to deal with Jesus and make sense of it, he is starting to doubt the wisdom of these leaders. And in fact, there's this little hint there. Perhaps he himself would like to become a disciple of Jesus if he can just find him and if he can just get some answers. So they reviled him and said, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we don't know where he's from." It's astonishing how arrogant and proud they are, and they're reduced now to just hurling abuse. But it seems that they have heard and learned nothing from the things that Jesus has been telling them about Moses. Do you remember he said, "For he spoke about me"? The man answered and said to them, "Well, here is an amazing thing, that you do not know where he is from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he hears him. Since the beginning of time, it's never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." So this man has sound theology. It's silly to think that because he's blind, he's not smart. He's really smart, and he's probably been learning from the Bible for much of his life. He may also have been hearing some of these things about Jesus and already been thinking about them. And now what he does is he speaks the truth and actually challenges the blindness of these leaders, which makes them really mad. And they answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you teaching us?" So they put him out, which is ironic because it's kind of what the disciples had suggested at the start, that someone's sin, the man's sin or his parents' sin, had caused the blindness. But that's not the case. In a profound irony, it's actually the sin of the Pharisees that has made them blind. And Jesus heard that they'd put him out, and finding him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And he answered, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you." And he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. What a great moment. One of the absolute highlights in the gospel. And it's lovely. Here he is, kicked out by the Jewish leaders, but sought out by Jesus. And he's read the sign correctly. He's seen that it's pointing to Jesus' identity. And perhaps he's heard that phrase, the Son of Man. He's heard things about him. And now he has his sight again. And he knows that this must be the Christ. And John gives us this lovely example, which I think is a witness to us all of how to respond rightly and truly with faith to Jesus' signs. And it's quite comparable, I think, to the response of the Samaritan woman. There's a lot of parallels between them, including the way Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one who is speaking to you." Here are these two people who's outsiders, outcasts in many ways, whose names we do not know, but who respond with powerful, life-changing faith. So now we come to that statement about judgment. And Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, so that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind." Jesus said to the man, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And look at this thing he'd said earlier. God has given him authority to execute judgment because he is the Son of Man. So the Son of Man sheds light and can make the blind see. But judgment is also revealed because those who see become blind. Those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said to him, "We are not blind too, are we?" And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." Remember, the point he made with the judgment was that those who see would become blind. So these Pharisees, he doesn't just say to the Pharisees, "Yes, you're blind." It's more than that. He says the fact that you claim you can see means that your ignorance is willful. This is not just genuine ignorance. I really don't know. I know nothing. If you were blind, you'd have no sin. But because you claim you can see, this willful rejection of the truth and the light that's shining, this means that your sin remains and that you are truly blind. So I might finish with the question about how we will choose to respond to the light and the truth of Jesus. He invites us, while you have the light, believe in the light so that you may become children of light and share the joy and the transformation that blind man also received. See you next time.